Hi, and welcome to week 7, Learning to Read in a New Language. It's hard to believe we are already at the midpoint of the course, but we have arrived at week 7. So this week, before you jump into the content learning for the week, you'll see that there is a brief survey that I have linked at the top of the page on Brightspace for you to provide some feedback on the course. It should only take a few minutes. It's just a couple of questions, but it will help me as I continue to think about ways to make the course better. So you can tell me what you really enjoy and anything that I can change that would improve the course. So thank you for taking a few minutes to give me some feedback. So this week we are focusing on learning to read. We've spent some time thinking about oracy development and writing. So now we're transitioning to yet another domain of language as we think about both the opportunities that we have working with multilingual learners in literacy development and in reading in particular, and some of the challenges that multilingual learners might face as they're learning to read in English. To begin, we're going to watch a 40-minute film called Why Reading is Hard. And this film, while it's somewhat dated now, it was released in the early 2000s. It does a really nice job, I think, showcasing some of the difficulties that students might face and some of the things for teachers to think about in terms of the supports that students need. Dr. Catherine Snow begins the video by walking you through her own experience of learning to read Arabic and kind of showing you that and walking you through that process. And I think it's a really helpful experience to remember what it's like to learn to read a language when you can't even decode the symbols on the page. After that, there's a mini lecture where I talk about some opportunities, challenges, and strategies for supporting multilingual learners in reading and go through some examples with you in that. And then we move into step 4, which is unpacking the science of reading. So I didn't want to have a week focused on reading where we don't address the science of reading, given that I imagine many of you have heard the term before. It is certainly a big part of discourse around education today. And so on the Brightspace page, I shared some of my own reflections about the science of reading, both the way that it's talked about as a thing, which often equates or is referring to, is equated to phonics and phonemic awareness. And then the actual science of reading, which is a large body of research that does involve multilingual learners and is much more expansive and has a lot more to tell us about what we know about how to support multilingual learners in reading. So certainly phonics and phonemic awareness is important, decoding matters, but there are other things we know that are really important for multilingual learners in particular from research that teachers should be aware of. So I include some of those items in my written reflection there, but I've also linked an optional reading if you do want to go a little bit deeper, a short statement that was released by the Reading League that talks about, what the science of reading is and what we know about reading for multilingual learners that connects to that body of science. After that, we move into strategies. So that's where we'll kind of dive into the work of what does it actually look like to support multilingual learners in reading, learning to read and reading to learn in the classroom. A lot of our focus in this course is specifically looking at comprehension, but certainly there are other elements of reading we would want to consider with our MLLs. I'm actually having you try out one of the strategies that I really like that supports comprehension, which is called the anticipation guide. An anticipation guide essentially is a series of statements that students encounter before they read a text. They have to read through those statements and decide whether or not they agree or disagree with each statement. And then they read the text and find out what the answers are. So I created an anticipation guide for you for the Gibbons chapter 6. So before you read the book in our course text, please do the anticipation guide. I want you to predict what you think. If you decide if you agree or disagree with the statements, read the text and then see if you were right. And it really is a powerful comprehension tool, the anticipation guide, because it, as one teacher described it to me, kind of makes reading a text feel like a scavenger hunt because you already have an idea of what some of the key points are in the reading that you're going to be engaging with. And so you're looking for them as you're reading and trying to find the answers to those statements. After you finish that chapter, there's also a chapter from Cloud and colleagues focused on reading specifically for adolescent English learners. And while, again, it's focused on secondary students, I do think there's a lot of useful strategies in that chapter as well for elementary learners. So I hope you can find good strategies to pull for supporting reading across both of those 2 chapters for this week. After that, we move into a few more viewings. We have a video focusing on teaching text structures using graphic organizers that I think is really a helpful way to think about how we can support students to not just engage with the text and look for main ideas, which can sometimes feel like kind of a vague, difficult thing for students to do, but to really help them understand the way texts are organized and how once they learn to recognize those different types of text structures or text organization features, they can more easily make sense of what key ideas are and pull information from a text. I then provided my own example of how you can teach text structures with graphic organizers based on that video that you'll be reading or watching from Call to Pedagogy. And that is it. From there, we move into the discussion board. And then this week, as you think about applications, just remember to continue to make progress on your PD project and your advocacy or problem paper. And know that next week, you're going to be choosing a strategy from the ORC Writing or Reading Week and trying it out in a classroom setting. So kind of keep that in mind as you're engaging with this week. I know that that's coming down the pike as we move into the next week. So I hope you enjoy learning about reading and engaging with the content for this week. And I look forward to seeing your thoughts on the discussion board.